Ever heard of a story so powerful it could save a life? Well, today we're re-diving into the legendary tale that started it, all the story behind the 1001 Nights. It begins in ancient Persia with two royal brothers. The elder Shahriyar was the powerful Sultan of Persia. The younger Shazinan was the king of Tartary, a kingdom gifted to him by his loving brother. After 10 long years apart, they longed to see each other. So Shazinan set off on a grand journey to visit the Sultan. But on the very first night, he decided to sneak back to his palace for one last surprise farewell to his queen, whom he adored. Imagine his horror when he walked in to find her sleeping with a common slave. In a blind rage, he killed them both on the spot. He then resumed his journey, but with a heavy heart, cloaked in a deep, unshakable sadness. When he arrived in Persia, Sultan Shahriyar was overjoyed to see his brother, but grew concerned by his profound melancholy. He tried everything to cheer him up: feasts, hunts, grand spectacles, but nothing worked. Shazinan remained lost in his sorrow. Then, one day, just as suddenly as it appeared, the sadness vanished. He was back to his old, cheerful self. The Sultan was baffled. First, this mysterious grief, and now this sudden recovery. He begged his brother for an explanation. Reluctantly, Shazinan confessed the story of his wife's betrayal, but pleaded with the Sultan not to ask how he got over it. This only made Shahriyar more suspicious. He insisted, sensing the secret involved him somehow. Finally, Shazinan gave in. He asked the Sultan to stage a fake hunting trip the next day. As instructed, Shahriyar secretly returned to his brother's apartments, to a hidden closet overlooking his own queen's private gardens. There, with his own eyes, he witnessed a sight that shattered his world. His wife, the Sultaness, being unfaithful with one of her attendants. His own honor was in ruins. Shazinan then explained, "It was seeing your betrayal that cured my sorrow. If even a great and powerful man like you could not escape the infidelity of a woman, I realized it was a common misfortune and foolish for me to grieve any longer." Consumed by rage and grief, Shahriyar executed his unfaithful wife and her lover. He then proposed to his brother that they abandon their thrones and live as hermits, away from the treachery of women. Shazinan agreed, but with one condition: they would return to their kingdoms only if they met someone even more unfortunate than themselves. Disguised, they journeyed to the sea. As dawn broke, a terrifying giant genie rose from the water, carrying a locked glass box on his head. He sat down, unlocked the box, and out stepped a breathtakingly beautiful woman. The genie, who had stolen her on her wedding day, laid his head in her lap and fell asleep. As soon as the genie was snoring, the woman quietly moved his head, went to a chest, and pulled out a string of rings. She counted them 98 in total. She then looked at the sleeping giant and said, "Fool, to think you can keep a woman locked away. Despite your jealousy, each of these rings is from a different lover I've taken while in your care." The two brothers in the tree were her 99th and 100th. After the genie awoke and departed, the brothers came down from the tree. Shahriyar was convinced. This genie, with his 100-fold betrayal, was far more unfortunate than they were. He agreed to return to his capital and resume his rule, but the experience left him forever changed. He devised a cruel plan to ensure he would never be betrayed again. Every single night he would marry a new bride, and every single morning he would have her executed. The kingdom was plunged into terror. Every family with a beautiful daughter lived in fear. The people's love for their sultan turned to hatred, but no one dared to defy him. This is when a hero emerges from the most unexpected place. Scheherazade, the brilliant and brave daughter of the Grand Vizier, the very man tasked with carrying out the execution steps forward. She has a plan to end the bloodshed, her plan to offer herself as the Sultan's next bride. Her father was horrified, but Scheherazade was determined. She believed she could save the women of her kingdom with the power of a story, and that is where the 1001 Nights truly begin. Once upon a time, in a land of wonders, there lived a sultan named Shahryar. His heart was hardened by betrayal, and he had made a terrible vow. Each day he would marry a new bride, only to have her executed the very next morning. The kingdom was gripped by fear and sorrow as family after family lost a daughter to the Sultan's cruel decree. One day, to the horror of the Grand Vizier, his own daughter, the wise and beautiful Scheherazade, announced her intention to marry the Sultan. The Vizier pleaded with her, even telling her a cautionary tale to dissuade her. He spoke of a farmer who could understand the language of animals. The farmer overheard an ass giving bad advice to an ox, telling it to refuse to work. The next day, the lazy ass was forced to do the ox's hard labor, learning a harsh lesson about meddling in others' affairs. The vizier warned Scheherazade that her own stubbornness would lead to a terrible fate. He then continued the farmer's story. The farmer's wife saw him burst into laughter one day after hearing another animal conversation. He had overheard the clever ass trick the ox back into working by telling it the farmer planned to have it butchered if it remained defiant. The farmer found this hilarious, but his wife became obsessed with knowing the reason for his laughter. The farmer explained that revealing the secret would cost him his life, but she wouldn't listen. Distraught, the farmer was about to give in when he overheard his dog complaining to a rooster about the situation. The rooster scoffed, saying, "My master can't even manage one wife, while I handle 50. He should just take a stick to her, and she learn her place." The farmer took the rooster's advice. His wife quickly changed her tune, and the secret remained safe. The vizier finished his tale, telling Scheherazade that if she persisted, she would be treated just as stubbornly. But Scheherazade was unswayed. Her mind was set. With a heavy heart, the vizier presented his daughter to Sultan Shahryar. The Sultan was captivated by her beauty, but warned the vizier that the vow would not be broken. Scheherazade would die at dawn, and the vizier himself would have to be the one to carry out the sentence. Even with this threat, Scheherazade remained calm. As she was led to the royal chambers, she made a simple request to the Sultan. Could her younger sister, Dinazade, be allowed to visit her one last time before dawn to say farewell? The Sultan, intrigued by this unusual bride, agreed. An hour before sunrise, Dinarzade entered the chamber as planned. But instead of tearful goodbyes, she made an even stranger request. "My dear sister," she said, "before we part forever, would you tell me one of the many wonderful stories you know?" The Sultan, who was still awake, was surprised. He was curious to hear what kind of story would be requested at such a moment. Seeing his interest, Scheherazade looked at him and, with a glimmer of hope, began her tale. What story could she possibly tell to save her own life? The fate of the kingdom rested on the words she was about to speak.
There was formerly a merchant whose extensive traffic obliged him to travel to many places, in one of which journeys, finding himself much incommoded by the heat of the day, he alighted from his horse and sat down in a shady grove. When taking some dates out of his portmanteau, he ate them, throwing the shells on each side of him. When he had done eating, being a good Mussulman, he washed his hands and feet at an adjoining rivulet, and said his prayers. While he was yet on his knees, a monstrous genie, all white with age, advanced toward him with a scimitar in his hand, and uttering a frightful cry, exclaimed, "Rise up, that I may kill thee, as thou hast killed my son." The merchant, terrified as much at his appearance as at his threats, protested his innocence. "How," exclaimed the genie, "did you not, even now, throw about the shells of your dates? My son was passing by, and you threw one of them into his eye, which killed him. Therefore I must kill thee," saying which he took the merchant by the arm, threw him on the ground, and lifted up the scimitar to cut off his head. In this imminent danger, the merchant earnestly entreated permission to return home, and settle his affairs, and take leave of his family. "What time do you require?" said the genie. "I ask." "A year," replied the merchant. "I swear by Allah that this day 12th I will return under these trees, to put myself into your hands." Upon this, the genie disappeared. The merchant returned home disconsolate. Fiam employed the allotted time in properly regulating his affairs, and when it was near expired, he took a sorrowful leave of his family, and arrived at the place where he had promised to meet the genie. While he was waiting for his dreaded approach, he saw two old men coming toward him from different quarters, the first leading a hind, the second two black dogs. They approach the trees where the unfortunate mare, Int, was sitting, when one of them said to him, "Brother, why do you stay in this place? Do you not know that a number of evil spirits resort to it, and that it is by no means safe to continue here?" "Alas," said the merchant, "I know that but too well." He then related his story to the old men, who, having heard it, agreed to continue with him until the genie should appear. In a little time they perceived a thick vapor advancing toward them, which, vanishing all at once, discovered Teen Genie. Without noticing the old men, he took the merchant by the arm, saying, "Kais, that I may kill thee, as thou didst kill my son." The merchant filled the air with his cries, and the old men, prostrating themselves on the ground, entreated for him. The genie, with some difficulty, was persuaded to listen to their expostulations, and at length to agree that if their several adventures were more surprising than that of the merchant, he would relent and set him at liberty day. Advancing, the Sultan arose, and the vizier, in much affliction, entered into his presence, in full expectation of receiving the usual fatal orders. But the Sultan was so much taken with the beauty and accomplishments of his lady, and his curiosity was so much excited by the interesting story she had begun, that he became irresolute respecting his vow, and talking to his trembling vizier on other affairs, he left him in suspense, also as to the fate of his beloved daughter. The next morning, Scheherazade resumed her narrative with the history of. If you liked the video, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and hit.
"I married," began the first old man, "in my early life, my cousin, with whom I lived more than 20 years in much happiness. The only thing that abated it was that we had no children. The desire of posterity induced me to buy a slave, by whom I shortly had a son. I still lived in great harmony with my wife, who always treated the slave kindly, and appeared to be very fond of my boy. Some years after his birth I was obliged to go a long journey, and on my return, my wife told me that my son and my slave were both dead. I lamented their loss very much, but the feast of Bairam approaching, I thought it my duty to overcome my sorrow, and prepare for the holy festival. Accordingly I gave orders to my farmer to bring up one of the fattest cows, to sacrifice at the commencement of the solemnity. He obeyed, but when the cow was brought to me she bellowed piteously, and I could perceive tears run down from her eyes. Struck with so singular a spectacle, and moved, knew not how, one was about to send the cow back and order another, when my wife opposed any exchange with great vehemence. I suffered myself to be prevailed on, and though I could not kill her myself, I ordered my farmer to do so, who obeyed me. When she was slain, it was found, notwithstanding her plump appearance, that she was mere skin and bone, and wholly unfit for the intended sacrifice. I immediately sent for another fat beast. When the farmer brought a calf, whose behaviour was still more extraordinary, he broke the cord, ran to me, and fell at my feet. I determined to listen to the impulse I felt in favour of this calf, and accordingly ordered him to be taken back, although my wife interfered with still greater eagerness, and insisted that he should be slaughtered. The day following, my farmer desired to speak with me alone. He took me to his own habitation, and introduced me to his daughter. By her I was informed that during my journey my wife had learned the black art, and by that means had transformed my slave into the cow we had unfortunately slaughtered the day before, and my son into the calf which had so narrowly escaped. I leave you to judge, powerful genie, how much I was distressed at this account, but not doubting my informer was able to restore my son, as she had the skill to discover his situation. I very earnestly besought her assistance on 2 conditions. Replied she, I will restore him. First, that you give him me for a husband, and secondly, that you permit me to punish, as she deserves, the wicked enchantress who has transformed him. I consented. She then pronounced certain words, and sprinkling my son with water, he resumed his shape. He joyfully married his fair benefactress, who changed my wicked wife into the hind you see here. The story of the old man with the 2 black dogs, prince of genii. Said the second old man, these dogs and myself are brothers. On the death of our father we divided his substance among us, and each received 1,000 sequins. One of my brothers resolved to travel, laid out his money in goods suited to the country he intended to visit, and departed. After a year's absence, he returned in great distress, having lost all his effects. Meantime, by industry, I had acquired an additional 1,000 sequins, which I readily gave him. My other brother, not disheartened by the ill success of the first, pursued the same measures. Very shortly he also returned entirely ruined. To him also I gave another 1,000 sequins. We then agreed to remain at home, and pursue our business carefully, without seeking further adventures. Some years afterward, both my brothers besought me to join with them in a trading voyage. Their importunity prevailed. I disposed of my stock, which now produced 6,000 sequins, half of which I buried in a corner of the house, and gave each of my brothers 1,000 of the remainder. We arrived safely at our destined port, where we sold our adventures to good profit. When we were nearly ready to return, I met on the banks of the sea a lady, handsome, but poorly clad, who very earnestly persuaded me to marry her. I consented, and having taken her on board the vessel, we set sail. My wife proved to be possessed of so many good qualities that I became every day more fond of her. My unworthy brothers, envying my superior good fortune, seized us both while asleep, and threw us into the sea. But little did these bad men imagine the punishment that awaited their cruelty and ingratitude. My wife was a fairy. She conveyed me home, and conducted the vessel, which had ray goods on board, safe into port. Before one knew of its arrival, 2 black dogs came crouching to me in the most submissive manner. These, said the fairy, are your brothers. Thus is their wickedness requited, and it is one part of their punishment, that in this degraded state they must look for support and protection to the buyer that they so basely betrothed. The genie thought these adventures so singular that he remitted the punishment of the merchant and disappeared. And the merchant, after suitably thanking his benefactors, returned home again with joy to his family. The Sultan was delighted with these stories. He requested Scheherazade to proceed next night to another, and going into the divan the vizier, his family, the court, and the people in general were overjoyed to find that he gave no orders to put the beautiful sultaness to death. If you liked the video,
"Prince of Genii," said the second old man, "these dogs and myself are brothers. On the death of our father, we divided his substance among us, and each received 1,000 sequins. One of my brothers resolved to travel, laid out his money and goods suited to the country he intended to visit, and departed. After a year's absence, he returned in great distress, having lost all his effects. Meantime, by industry, I had acquired an additional 1,000 sequins, which I readily gave him. My other brother, not disheartened by the ill success of the first, pursued the same measures. Very shortly he also returned entirely ruined. To him also I gave another 1,000 sequins. We then agreed to remain at home and pursue our business carefully, without seeking further adventures. Some years afterward, both my brothers besought me to join with them in a trading voyage. Their importunity prevailed. I disposed of my stock, which now produced 6,000 sequins, half of which I buried in a corner of the house, and gave each of my brothers 1,000 of the remainder. We arrived safely at our destined port, where we sold our adventures to good profit. When we were nearly ready to return, I met on the banks of the sea a lady, handsome, but poorly clad, who very earnestly persuaded me to marry her. I consented, and having taken her on board the vessel, we set sail. My wife proved to be possessed of so many good qualities that I became every day more fond of her. My unworthy brothers, envying my superior good fortune, seized us both while asleep and threw us into the sea. But little did these bad men imagine the punishment that awaited their cruelty and ingratitude. My wife was a fairy. She conveyed me home and conducted the vessel, which had ray goods on board, safe into port. Before I knew of its arrival, 2 black dogs came crouching to me in the most submissive manner. "These," said the fairy, "are your brothers. Thus is their wickedness requited, and it is one part of their punishment, that in this degraded stye they must look for support and protection to the Bayada they so basely betraj carat ed." The genie thought these adventures so singular that he remitted the punishment of the merchant and disappeared, and the merchant, after suitably thanking his benefactors, returned home again with joy to his family. The Sultan was delighted with these stories. He requested Scheherazade to proceed next night to another, and going into the divan, the vizier, his family, the court, and the people in general were overjoyed to find that he gave no orders to put the beautiful sultaness to death. Imagine a poor, old fisherman, his back bent by years of toil, casting his net into the sea. Day after day, he followed the same ritual, his livelihood depending on the whims of the ocean. He had a rule: cast his net only 4 times a day, no more, no less. On this particular day, the first 3 casts brought up nothing but mud, a dead donkey, and broken pottery. His heart grew heavy. With one final cast left, he whispered a prayer and hauled his net with all his might. It was incredibly heavy. Hope flickered in his chest. Could this be the catch that would change his fortune? He dragged the net ashore and peered inside. There, gleaming amidst the seaweed and shells, was a copper vessel, sealed with a lead stopper bearing the ancient and powerful seal of Solomon. The fisherman was overjoyed. This vessel must be worth a fortune. He could sell it and provide for his family for months. But curiosity, a powerful force, began to bubble within him. What could be inside? He decided to open it. Perhaps it was filled with gold or precious jewels. Using his knife, he pried at the lead stopper. It was stubborn, but with a final grunt of effort, it popped free. He tilted the vessel, expecting a trickle of coins or a cascade of gems. Instead, a thick, dense smoke billowed out, spiraling high into the sky, forming a colossal, terrifying cloud. The fisherman stumbled back, his eyes wide with fear. The smoke then condensed, coalescing into a gigantic, monstrous being, a genie, an ifrit, whose head was in the clouds and whose feet were planted firmly on the ground. His eyes glowed like embers, and his voice boomed like thunder. The fisherman, trembling, could barely stand. He managed to stammer, "Great Ifrit, I thank the heavens for this day. Will you not reward me for freeing you from your long imprisonment?" The genie's laughter was a chilling, terrible sound that echoed across the shore. "Reward you?" he bellowed. "Foolish mortal, prepare to die." The fisherman was stunned. Die? But I am your rescuer. Why would you kill me? The genie's face contorted with rage. For centuries, I have been trapped in that wretched bottle, he explained. For the first 100 years, I vowed to grant my rescuer eternal riches. No one came. For the next 100, I promised to grant them all the treasures of the earth. Still, no one came. After another century, I swore I would grant them 3 wishes, whatever they might be. But no one came. The genie's voice dropped to a menacing growl. Finally, consumed by rage and despair, I made a new vow. I swore that I would kill the one who finally freed me, allowing them only to choose the manner of their death. You, fisherman, are that person. So, tell me, how do you wish to die? The fisherman's mind raced. He was facing a being of immense power, driven by an ancient, burning anger. A direct plea for mercy was useless. He had to be clever. A spark of an idea ignited in his mind. He looked at the genie with feigned disbelief. You wish to kill me? I find that hard to believe from one so great, the fisherman said, his voice surprisingly steady. But before you do, I must ask one question, for my own curiosity. I simply cannot believe that a being as vast and mighty as you could ever have fit inside this tiny copper vessel. It seems impossible. The genie scoffed. Impossible? You doubt my power? You dare to question me? It's not that I doubt you, the fisherman replied calmly, but my eyes cannot comprehend it. Unless I see it with my own eyes, I will never believe that all of you could fit into this small flask. The genie, his pride stung, roared, Then watch, you ignorant fool, and witness my power. In an instant, the colossal figure began to dissolve. The monstrous form dissipated back into a thick column of smoke, which swirled and funneled itself, pouring back into the narrow opening of the copper vessel on the sand. The fisherman watched, his heart pounding in his chest, as the last wisp of smoke was drawn inside. He didn't hesitate for a second. With lightning speed, he lunged forward, grabbed the lead stopper with the seal of Solomon, and slammed it back into the mouth of the flask, sealing the furious genie inside once more. The genie's muffled roars of rage echoed from within the vessel. Let me out, fisherman. I will reward you. I will make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. But the fisherman was no longer a fool. He had learned a valuable lesson. Oh, mighty genie, he called out, his voice now firm and confident. I heard your story of broken vows. You had centuries to plan my reward, but chose my death instead. Now you will remain in this prison, a warning to all about the consequences of ingratitude. The genie begged and pleaded, promising all the wonders of the world, but the fisherman's mind was made up. He picked up the heavy vessel. He could have sold it, but he knew the danger it contained was too great. He walked to the edge of the water and, with all his strength, hurled the copper flask back into the deepest part of the sea, where it would remain, hopefully, for all eternity. The fisherman, though still poor, returned home that day a much wiser man. He had faced death and outsmarted a powerful being not with strength, but with wit and courage. His story teaches us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, a clever mind can be the most powerful weapon of all. It's a timeless reminder that quick thinking and ingenuity can triumph where brute force fails.
There was a king of Greece who was sorely afflicted with a grievous leprosy. His physicians had exerted all their art in vain. His case was declared hopeless, and Ha expected every day to sink under the loathsome disease which oppressed him. At this time there came to his court a strange Phacean named Doban, who, after examining the patient, asserted that, so far from the king being incurable, he would undertake to restore his health without either inward potions or outward applications. This extraordinary proposal was readily accepted. The physician prepared a racket and besought the king to play at tennis with it. I have lodged, said he, certain drugs in the handle, which is hollow. When these are heated, they will penetrate 3 Majesty's whole frame. Leave off then, bathe, and retire to rest, and tomorrow you will find yourself perfectly cured. The king followed the direction of Doban, and rose the next morning entirely free from his malady. The physician was invested with the most distinguished honors. The king loaded him also with riches, and the courtiers with caresses. He became the declared favorite, and every one who had a suit to prefer to the king solicited the interest of the physician. But amid all his prosperity, lurked the most fatal destruction. The Grecian king was a very weak prince, easily irritated and tyrannical in his disposition. His former favorites envied Dobon and seized every opportunity to excite distrust of him in the royal breast. "He is become," said they, "next in dignity and power to yourself. As he cured you in a manner so simple, may he not also by methods as unsuspected cut off your majesty, who alone stands between him and the throne?" For a long time the Grecian king repelled these insinuations. "Were I to listen to you," said he to his courtiers, "I should be like a certain man who had a faithful parrot, who reported to him the incontinence of his wife during his absence. The wife, enraged at the telltale, contrived a method of destroying the credit of the bird, and being revenged at the same time. Accordingly, when her husband went another journey, she caused a slave to scatter water over the cage all night, in the manner of rain, while others produced plus or minus the appearance of thunder and lightning. The next day, when the husband returned, the parrot complained of having been exposed all night to the fury of a continual storm. As the master knew the weather had been exceedingly fine, he hastily concluded that his bird was false, and in resentment put it to death. But the future ill conduct of his wife too soon proved to him his parrot's truth and his own rashness. "Sir," replied his vizier, "it is my duty to be particularly attentive to your safety, nor must I suffer you to be led by specious appearances into real danger." The vizier of a neighboring king was entrusted with the care of his master's only son, and so ill did he perform that duty, that he suffered the young prince to separate from his train, in the eagerness of the chase, till he was left alone and had lost his way. While he rode about, he came up to a handsome lady who appeared to be in great distress. The prince was naturally compassionate. He heard her tale, and at her request took her upon his horse, which he guided by her direction. They came at length to the ruins of a castle in a lonely place, where the lady desired him to alight. He obeyed. The lady entered the ruins, and while he was securing his horse, he heard her say softly, "Be glad, my children. I have brought you a handsome young man, very fat." Other voices immediately answered, "Mamma, where is he? Let us eat him presently, for we are very hungry." The prince heard enough to convince him of his deed. He perceived that the supposed distressed lady was really an ogress, wife to one of those savage demons called ogres, who frequent remote places and use 1,000 wiles to surprise and devour passengers. He began to untie his horse again with all diligence, putting up all the while prayers to heaven for his deliverance. The ogress, returning to the door, never doubted but B was still employed in fastening his horse, and hearing him utter prayers, she also pretended to put up ejaculations. But the prince was not to be deceived by this hypocrisy. Having loosened the rein, he leaped upon the saddle, and was soon out of the monster's power. But although he escaped unhurt, his royal father was so much enraged at the danger he had been in, that he very justly caused his careless vizier to be put to death. I should deserve the same punishment if I did not protest against the conduct of Dobon, who, though as specious as the ogress, may be equally dangerous. The credulous Grecian king began at length to listen to these insinuations, which the vizier, observing, so inflamed his passions that he caused his benefactor to be seized and brought into his presence to be put to death. Dobon, astonished at so fatal a denunciation, solicited earnestly for mercy, but in vain. "You see," said the fisherman to the genie, "how the king treated his benefactor. So have you also behaved to me." When Dobon found himself in the hands of the executioner, he once more applied himself to the king, requesting he would, at least, allow him to live till the next day. "I have," said he to the cruel prince, "among my books one well worthy of your majesty's acceptance. If, when my head is struck off, you will open the book at the 6th leaf, and read the 3rd line, my head will answer any question you shall ask the king." Though insensible to pity or to gratitude, was moved B.J. a frivolous curiosity to defer the execution. The following day, when Dobon was brought into the royal presence, he renewed his supplication for life, reminded the king of his services, and in the most earnest manner protested his innocence. The unworthy prince told him plainly that all he could say was in vain. "Were it only," continued he, "to hear your head speak after it is cut off. It is my pleasure you should be put to death." The physician, seeing his fate inevitable, submitted. He presented a large folio to the king. "Place my head," said he, "for a moment on the cover of this book, and I shall be in a condition to answer your questions." The executioner performed his office, and the head being placed as directed, the blood stanched, the eyes opened, and it called upon the king to open the book. The king obeyed, but finding the leaves stick together, he put his finger to his mouth and wetted it to separate them. When he came to the 6th leaf, he said, "Please, physician, there is nothing written here." "Turn over leaf by leaf," said the head, "till you come to the writing." The king continued to turn over the leaves, putting his finger continually to his mouth, till the poison with which each leaf was impregnated took effect. The asterisk head, perceiving that the king had but few moments to live, exclaimed, "Tyrant, you are justly punished." Having said this, its eyes closed, and it remained without life. The king, also, in a short time, fell down and expired. "You find, genie," said the fisherman, "that though the physician could not preserve his life, he contrived to punish his ungrateful murderer. I am more fortunate in being now out of your power, and having you in mine. I am now about to return you to the sea." "My good friend," replied the genie, "remember, revenge is forbidden. Do not treat me as a mamma did." "How was that?" asked the fisherman. "Ho," replied the genie, "do you think I can tell stories in this confinement? Let me out, and I will tell you as many as you please." "No," said the fisherman, "I will not let you out. On the contrary, I will this moment cast you back into the sea." "Hear me, I charge," exclaimed the genie. "If thou wilt deliver me, I swear in the most solemn manner that I will not hurt thee. On the contrary, I will teach thee how to become as rich as thou desirest to be." Overcome by this promise, the fisherman once more opened the vessel, and the genie, resuming his form, instantly kicked it into the sea. The fisherman was alarmed at this action, but the genie assured him he was safe. He then led him up a mountain, from whence they descended to a great pond that lay between 4 hills. "Cast in thy nets here," said the genie, "and carry the fish thou shalt take to the Sultan, who will liberally reward thee. Only beware not to throw in thy nets more than once a day, or thou wilt repent it." Having said this, the genie disappeared. The fisherman immediately threw in his nets. But though the pond seemed to abound with fish, he caught only 4. He was much pleased to find them unusually beautiful, and each of a different color, one being white, one red, one blue, and one yellow. Having much admired them, he set off for the palace, to present them to the Sultan. The singular beauty of the fish made them very acceptable. The liberal prince rewarded the fishermen with 400 pieces of gold, and ordered them to be served as a part of the entertainment of the day. But an amazing prodigy disappointed the Sultan. As the cook was frying the fish, on turning them the wall of the kitchen opened, and a beautiful young lady entered, holding a rod of myrtle in her hand, and advancing to the pan, she struck one of the fish, saying, "Fish, fish, are ye in your duty?" When the 4 fish, lifting up their heads together, said, "Yes, yes, if you reckon, we reckon. If you fly, we overcome, and are content." As soon as they had thus spoken, the lady overturned the frying pan and passed again through the wall, which closed immediately and became as before. The cook was exceedingly terrified, but recovering herself and picking up the fish, she had the misfortune to find that they were burnt to a cinder and utterly unfit to be served at the royal table. She was under the necessity of relating the phenomenon to the vizier. That minister invented an excuse which satisfied the Sultan, but being very desirous of seeing so strange a scene, he ordered the fisherman to provide him for other fish of the same sort as soon as possible. The day following, the fisherman obeyed the vizier's orders, and to his great joy received another 400 pieces of gold. The vizier shut himself up with the cook, who placed the fish on the fire, and on turning them, when fried on one side, the wall again opened. The lady appeared the same. Dialogue passed between her and the fish. When having overturned the pan, she retired, and the wall closed, as on the preceding day. The vizier, astonished beyond measure at so great a prodigy, failed not to relate the matter to the Sultan. That prince was equally surprised and impatient to see so strange a scene himself. The fisherman provided 4 more fish on the following day, and again received a sum, which was to him quite a treasure. The Sultan, attended by his vizier, retired into his closet. The fish were placed on the fire, and on turning them, the wall opened. But instead of the young lady, there came out a gigantic black, in the habit of a slave, who advanced with an air of anger to the pan, and touching one of the fish, said, in a terrible voice, "Fish, are thee in your duty?" At these words, the fish raised up their heads, and answered, "Yes, yes, we are. If you reckon, we reckon. If you pay your debts, we why ours. If you fly, we overcome, and are content." To black then, threw the pan into the middle of the closet, and the fish were reduced to coal. Having done this, he read fiercely, and the wall shut, and remained as before. When the Sultan recovered from his astonishment, he sent for the fisherman to know where he caught these extraordinary fish, and finding it was near the city, he ordered his usual retinue, and set off immediately. On ascending the mountain, the pond, and an immense plain beyond it, presented themselves, which no one remembered to have seen before. The Sultan ordered his court to encamp by the side of the pond, and retired to his pavilion with his vizier. To him the Sultan declared his resolution of exploring, alone, this new-discovered plain, in hopes of finding out the cause of so many wonderful events. He commanded the vizier to detain his attendants on that spot, and to excuse to them his not appearing, under the pretense of his being indisposed. At the dawn of the morning, the Sultan set forward, and by sunrise he saw before him a great building, which roved to be a magnificent palace of black marble. As the gates were open, the prince entered, but met no any living creature. He wandered through many spacious apartments, all furnished in the most splendid manner, and kept in the most exact order. He called out aloud, but no one answered. After walking about a long time, he grew weary, and sitting down was beginning to reflect on the wonders which had happened, when he was interrupted by the voice of one complaining. He listened attentively, and following the sound he came to a magnificent hall, at the upper end of which, on a throne of burnished gold, sat a handsome young man, richly habited in regal attire, but oppressed with the deepest melancholy. As the Sultan drew near, he saluted him. The young prince returned the salute by bowing his head. "I ought to rise, sir," said he to the Sultan, "to receive you, but, alas, I can but too well apologize for continuing in this posture." Saying this, he drew aside his robe, and discovered to the Sultan that he was only a man from the head to the girdle, and that the other part of his body was black marble. "What you show me," said the Sultan, "fills me with grief and horror. One conjure you, most unfortunate prince, to relate to me by what accident you have been reduced to your present situation. I am persuaded your story is somehow connected with certain extraordinary events, which have occurred to me lately. Perhaps fortune has led me hither to be of service to you." "Alas," replied the young man, "I have no hope of relief. Yet though I must renew my grief by repeating my story, your appearance, as well as your offers of assistance, entitle you to compliance. If you liked the video, do you and forget to subscribe to.
I succeeded my father to the throne of the Black Isles a few years ago, and invited to share it with me a young lady whom I had loved from my earliest infancy. She was my cousin. We were bred up together, and I had every reason to suppose I was equally dear to her. After a short time, I found a visible coolness in the Queen's behaviour, which afflicted me the more as it seemed to increase daily, and I could no way account for it. Lee chanced as I was reposing on a sofa, two of her attendants came into the room and supposing me asleep. One of them said to the other, "Is not the queen much to blame to treat this amiable prince so ill? I wonder he does not discover her enormities." "You do not know, then," replied the other, "that every evening she mixes in his drink the juice of a certain herb, which causes him to sleep, till by applying another herb to his nose she awakens him. Lee's by this means she escapes detection." Though I was much alarmed at this discourse, I still appeared to sleep. In the evening I supped with the queen, but when she presented me, before we retired, with a cup, I only pretended to drink, and holding it to my mouth some time, I returned it to her untasted. We withdrew to our chamber, where, as soon as I lay down on the bed, I pretended to fall into a deep sleep. The queen immediately arose, dressed herself, and having said to me, "Sleep, and may you never awake again," went out of the chamber. I was ready to follow her in an instant. She went to a little grove adjoining the garden, where a man was waiting for her. I reached the grove unobserved, and concealed myself behind a tree. I listened to their conversation, and found that she seemed to lavish a fondness on one who heard her very coolly. Enraged that she or a mole treat me so unworthily, I resolved to be revenged rem Herminian. According Carrot, when they had passed me, gave him a violent blow on the neck with my scimitar, which brought him to the ground. I supposed he was slain, and not caring to come to extremities with the queen, I retired in haste, without discovering myself, and returned immediately to my chamber. In the morning I found my wife lying by me as usual, but she either was, or pretended to be, in a profound sleep, so that I arose and went to council without having spoken to her. At dinner time she presented herself to me, clad in mourning, and expressed the utmost affliction. "Alas, sir, bide ye three, I am oppressed with the most cruel misfortunes. I have just heard of the death of my royal mother, and that the king, my father, has lost a battle, in which he and one of my brothers have fallen. Suffer me to retire for a 12-month to the palace of Tares, that I may pay a proper tribute to their memory." I was not sorry she thus disguised the true cause of her grief, and readily gave her the permission she desired. She withdrew accordingly to that palace, and thither I found out she conveyed her gallant. The wound I had given him would have been mortal, had she not preserved him by a drink, which she prepared and administered to him herself every day. But though she was able by this means to keep him alive, yet she could neither cure him nor restore his faculties. He lives, indeed, but he can neither walk, move, nor speak. His E.J. Caratus alone gives signs of existence, but not of sensibility. I hoped that time would have removed the queen's sorrow. I suffered her therefore to continue this course without interruption, but when at the end of 2 years I found that her criminal affliction was still cherished, I fatally resolved to let her know I was not unacquainted with the real source of it. I concealed myself behind the tomb which she had erected for her gallant, and became a witness of her ungovernable folly. The fondness she lavished on him was excessive, nor would it have been excusable had he been in perfect health. For this adored lover, this minion, thus doted on, was a black Indian, and, as I was well informed, as disgusting in his manners as in his person. "Alas!" exclaimed she, "'tis now 2 years since you have spoken to me. You return no answer to the many proofs of love I give you. Is it from the effect of your barbarous wound, or from contempt, that you are thus silent? O tomb, have you swallowed up the affection he had for me?" Enraged at these lamentations, I discovered myself all at once, and reproached her with TBO utmost severity. She heard me at first in silence and confusion, but when I not only declared myself the punisher of her gallant, but drew my scimitar to UKC away the remains of BIS life, her shame turned to rage. She instantly began to repeat enchantments, and pronouncing certain words I did not understand, one became as you see me, half marble, half man. Nor did I alone fall a sacrifice to the revenge of this wicked woman. By the force of her incantations she transformed my whole territory. The 4 islands which I reigned over are become the 4 hills you passed. My capital city is changed to a pond, and my people are turned into fishes of various colours, the Mussulmans being white, the Persians, who adore fire, red, the Christians, blue, and the Jews, yellow. This I learned from her rage and reproaches, for she is not satisfied with the evils I now suffer, but every day she comes here and gratifies her malice by invectives and even by blows which I have no power to resist. The young king, having finished his story, became overpowered with grief. The Sultan did his utmost to console him. In answer to the further inquiries of his visitor, the king informed him that the palace of Tares was adjoining to the hall they were in, that the enchantress visited the palace every morning at break of day, when she first exercised her cruelty on him, and then attended her gallant with the drink which preserved him from ring and butaled over him his helpless condition. The Sultan, having revolved these matters in his mind, took leave of the unhappy king, when he found he was a little composed, without acquainting him with his intention, lest a disappointment should aggravate his affliction. He found out the palace of Tares, and as soon as he came to the bed where the black lay, he put him to death, and dragging his body into the court of the palace, threw it into a well. He then laid aside his upper garment, and having blackened his hands, face, and neck, and taken his scimitar with him, he lay down on the bed in the same posture in which he had found the black. He passed the night without sleeping, his whole thoughts being occupied with the affair he was engaged in. At day brake the loud lamentations of the unfortunate king, and the severe blows he heard inflicted on him gave him notice that the wicked enchantress was at hand. The poor prince filled the palace with his outcries, and in vain besought her, in the most affecting manner, to have pity on him. Having gratified her cruelty, she left him, and entering the palace of Tares, began, in her turn, to use the language of affliction. "Alas!" exclaimed she, as she approached the bed on which her supposed lover lay, "can I ever sufficiently revenge the miseries I suffer? To whose jealousy and cruelty do I owe the wretched situation of my adored lover? Alas! My life, my love," continued she, addressing herself, as she supposed, to the black, "will you never be delivered from this state of insensibility and silence? Will you no more be able to tell me how much you love me?" The Sultan affected to awaken slowly, as from a deep sleep. At last, heaving a sigh, and imitating the accent of the blacks, he said, "There is no force, or power, but in God alone, who is almighty." The enchantress, on hearing these words, gave an excessive shout for joy, when the Sultan, turning toward her, said, "Unhappy queen, if thou wouldst have my recovery complete, restore thy husband, and cease to treat him with indignity." The fond enchantress flew to the hall, and taking a cup of water, pronounced certain words over it, which caused it to boil. Then throwing it on the young king, she said, "If thou art in thy present state by the force of my enchantments, resume thy natural powers." On her uttering these words, the prince instantly found himself restored. The joy he felt was scarcely allayed by the insolence of his enemy, who directed him in the haughtiest manner to leave the palace immediately and be seen there no more on pain of death. The enchantress returned with impatience to her supposed lover, and was delighted to find him appear much better. As she was hastening toward him, the Sultan cried out, "Stop, wretched lady! If thou approachest nearer to me, I'll relapse into my former state of insensibility. My recovery cannot be perfect until Tebau Nast reversed all TBY enchantments, which have produced juicy fatal consequences to TBY busband subjects and territory." The enchantress, elated with joy and hope, immediately withdrew, and in a few minutes dissolved all her spells, and restored everything to its former condition. The fishes became men, the houses and shops were again filled with their inhabitants, and the Sultan's retinue were as astonished to find themselves in the middle of a large and populous city. The wicked magician hastened back to the palace of Tares, and was transported to see her supposed lover sitting on the bed. Fearing, however, to approach him too hastily, she restrained herself, and said, "I have in all things obeyed you. I have restored to its first state everything that I had transformed." "Tea is well," replied the Sultan, rising up, and going toward her. "Come now, and receive the reward thou hast deserved." As she flew to meet him, he, with one blow of his scimitar, put an end to her life, at once punishing her past crimes, and preventing her repeating them. The joy of the king and people of the Black Isles, on their deliverance, was extreme. The Sultan heartily congratulated the king, inviting him at the same time to pass a few days in his capital, which they might reach in a few hours' ride, but the king of the isles undeceived him. "Though," said he, "you came hither in that time, yet now the enchantment is ended, you will find it several months' journey to the confines of your dominions. I will, however, readily attend you, and ever acknowledge my obligation to you to the last moment of my life." Accordingly, after a few days' repose, the young king added 100 camels laden with inestimable riches to the retinue of the Sultan, and joining the same with many of his nobles, he conducted that prince to his capital, where the carrot were received by the faithful inhabitants with the loudest acclamations. Nor was the fisherman forgot. As he was the cause of the discovery, the Sai Elton gave him a plentiful estate, which abundantly gratified his utmost wishes. If you like...
Ever heard the saying, curiosity killed the cat? Well, in ancient Baghdad, it almost got a caliph, 3 princes, and 1 very witty porter beheaded. This is the wild tale of the 3 ladies of Baghdad. Our story starts with a cheerful porter, the kind of guy who's always got a joke ready. One sunny morning, a beautiful and mysterious lady named Amin hires him to help with her shopping. The porter is instantly smitten. They go from shop to shop, filling his basket with the finest wine, fruits, and perfumes. He's so charming and funny that Amin is clearly impressed. They finally arrive at a grand house. Inside, he meets Amin's two sisters, Zobaide and Safi. The porter delivers the goods and gets a generous payment. But instead of leaving, he lingers. He just can't bring himself to leave these three enchanting women. He cleverly quotes a Baghdad proverb: "One is never well at table, except there be four in company." He argues that a party of three beautiful ladies is missing one crucial element: a man. The ladies laugh at his boldness. His wit and good manners convince them he's more than just a common porter. After a bit of debate and a lot of persuading from Amin, they agree to let him stay for dinner. But there's a catch, a very serious one. Zobaide points to a golden inscription over the gate. "He who speaks of things that do not concern him shall hear of things that will not please him." The porter has to swear an oath of silence about anything he sees that seems strange. Eager to stay, he quickly agrees. "You have my word," he promises. The evening starts wonderfully. There's food, wine, music, and laughter. The porter even sings a song that delights the ladies. But just as the party is in full swing, there's a loud knock at the gate. Safi opens it to find three calendars. Holy men, each blind in the right eye. They are strangers in Baghdad and beg for shelter for the night. The ladies, feeling charitable, agree to let them in, but only after making them read the inscription and swear the same oath of silence. The calendars enter, and one of them immediately spots the porter. "Look, a brother," he exclaims, mistaking him for one of their own. The porter, a little tipsy and annoyed, fires back, "Mind your own business. Haven't you read the sign?" The ladies have to step in to keep the peace. The party gets lively again, with more music. But soon, another knock echoes through the house. This time, it's the Caliph Harun al-Rashid himself, in disguise with his Grand Vizier, Jafar. They were walking the city streets at night, as was the Caliph's custom, when they heard the music. The Caliph, always curious, had to know what was going on. They pretend to be lost merchants from Mosul and beg for a place to stay. The ladies, having already let in so many strangers, agree, of course. The Caliph and his vizier are also shown the golden rule and promise to obey. Now, the guest list is quite something. 3 beautiful ladies, 1 witty porter, 3 one-eyed calendars, and the disguised ruler of Baghdad. And this is where things get truly bizarre. As the night wears on, Zobaide gets a somber look. She says it's time for them to perform their duty. Amin leaves and returns, leading to black dogs. Zobaide takes one, and to everyone's horror, begins to whip the poor animal mercilessly. The dog whimpers and cries, but Zobaide doesn't stop until she's exhausted. Then, in a shocking reversal, she kneels down, hugs the weeping dog, kisses it, and wipes away its tears. She repeats this entire, strange, and cruel ritual with the second dog. The guests are stunned into silence. The Caliph is particularly horrified. What could possibly explain this behavior? But he remembers his promise and holds his tongue. The strangeness isn't over. After the ordeal with the dogs, Amin picks up a lute and begins to sing a sad, haunting song. She gets so lost in the melody that she faints. As her sisters rush to help her, they open her dress for air, revealing her chest is covered in terrible scars and bruises. The Caliph can't take it anymore. The whipping of the dogs, the scarred woman, it's all too much. He looks around and sees the same confusion and horror on the faces of the calendars and the porter. He realizes they are just as clueless as he is. Breaking the rule, he whispers to the others, "We have to ask. We need to know what's going on." Everyone agrees, but no one is brave enough to be the one to speak. Finally, they all turn to the person who started this whole evening, the porter. They push him forward to be their spokesman. Just as he's about to speak, Amin recovers. Zobaide, seeing them all huddled together, asks what they were talking about. The porter, never one to be shy, blurts it all out. "Madam," he he says. "These gentlemen and I would like to know why you whipped those 2 dogs and then wept over them, and how that other lady got those awful scars." A furious silence falls over the room. Zobaide's face is like thunder. "Did you all agree to this question?" she asks, looking at the Caliph and the calendars. Sheepishly, they all nod. "Then you will face the punishment you were warned about," she declares. She stomps her foot 3 times, claps her hands, and shouts, "Come." A hidden door flies open, and 7 huge slaves, with gleaming scimitars, rush in. They grab each of the male guests, force them to the ground, and raise their swords to cut off their heads. Panic erupts. The porter, terrified, starts wailing, "Don't blame me, it was them. These one-eyed calendars bring ruin wherever they go." His desperate cries are so ridiculous that even in her rage, Zobaide almost laughs. The Caliph, realizing his life is truly on the line, is about to reveal his identity. But before he can, Zobaide speaks again. "If you have anything to say before you die," she says, "speak now." One of the calendars, a prince in disguise, lifts his head. "Madam," he says, "our stories are so incredible that if you were to hear them, you would surely spare our lives." Intrigued, Zobaide consults with her sisters. A flicker of curiosity crosses her face. "Very well," she says. "Tell your story. If it is as remarkable as you claim, perhaps we will reconsider." The slaves release them, and the first calendar, a prince who lost his eye on a fantastic journey, steps forward to begin his tale. And that, as they say, is where the story truly begins. But it's a tale for another night. Thanks for watching. If you love stories filled with mystery, adventure, and a touch of magic, make sure to subscribe for more tales from the ancient world. See you next time.
Ever heard of a story so powerful it could save a life? Well, today we're re-diving into the legendary tale that started it, all the story behind the 1001 Nights. It begins in ancient Persia with 2 royal brothers. The elder Shahriyar was the powerful Sultan of Persia. The younger Shazinan was the king of Tartary, a kingdom gifted to him by his loving brother. After 10 long years apart, they longed to see each other. So Shazinan set off on a grand journey to visit the Sultan. But on the very first night, he decided to sneak back to his palace for one last surprise farewell to his queen, whom he adored. Imagine his horror when he walked in to find her sleeping with a common slave. In a blind rage, he killed them both on the spot. He then resumed his journey, but with a heavy heart, cloaked in a deep, unshakable sadness. When he arrived in Persia, Sultan Shahriyar was overjoyed to see his brother, but grew concerned by his profound melancholy. He tried everything to cheer him up: feasts, hunts, grand spectacles, but nothing worked. Shazinan remained lost in his sorrow. Then, one day, just as suddenly as it appeared, the sadness vanished. He was back to his old, cheerful self. The Sultan was baffled. First, this mysterious grief, and now this sudden recovery. He begged his brother for an explanation. Reluctantly, Shazinan confessed the story of his wife's betrayal, but pleaded with the Sultan not to ask how he got over it. This only made Shahriyar more suspicious, he insisted, sensing the secret involved him somehow. Finally, Shazinan gave in. He asked the Sultan to stage a fake hunting trip the next day. As instructed, Shahriyar secretly returned to his brother's apartments, to a hidden closet overlooking his own queen's private gardens. There, with his own eyes, he witnessed a sight that shattered his world. His wife, The Sultaness being unfaithful with one of her attendants, his own honor was in ruins. Shahzaman then explained, "It was seeing your betrayal that cured my sorrow. If even a great and powerful man like you could not escape the infidelity of a woman, I realized it was a common misfortune and foolish for me to grieve any longer." Consumed by rage and grief, Shahryar executed his unfaithful wife and her lover. He then proposed to his brother that they abandon their thrones and live as hermits, away from the treachery of women. Shahzaman agreed, but with one condition: they would return to their kingdoms only if they met someone even more unfortunate than themselves. Disguised, they journeyed to the sea. As dawn broke, a terrifying giant genie rose from the water, carrying a locked glass box on his head. He sat down, unlocked the box, and out stepped a breathtakingly beautiful woman. The genie, who had stolen her on her wedding day, laid his head in her lap and fell asleep. As soon as the genie was snoring, the woman quietly moved his head, went to a chest, and pulled out a string of rings. She counted them 98 in total. She then looked at the sleeping giant and said, "Fool, to think you can keep a woman locked away. Despite your jealousy, each of these rings is from a different lover I've taken while in your care." The two brothers in the tree were her 99th and 100th. After the genie awoke and departed, the brothers came down from the tree. Shahryar was convinced. This genie, with his 100-fold betrayal, was far more unfortunate than they were. He agreed to return to his capital and resume his rule, but the experience left him forever changed. He devised a cruel plan to ensure he would never be betrayed again. Every single night he would marry a new bride, and every single morning he would have her executed. The kingdom was plunged into terror. Every family with a beautiful daughter lived in fear. The people's love for their sultan turned to hatred, but no one dared to defy him. This is when a hero emerges from the most unexpected place. Scheherazade, the brilliant and brave daughter of the Grand Vizier, the very man tasked with carrying out the execution steps forward. She has a plan to end the bloodshed, her plan to offer herself as the Sultan's next bride. Her father was horrified, but Scheherazade was determined. She believed she could save the women of her kingdom with the power of a story, and that is where the 1001 Nights truly begin. Once upon a time, in a land of wonders, there lived a sultan named Shahryar. His heart was hardened by betrayal, and he had made a terrible vow. Each day he would marry a new bride, only to have her executed the very next morning. The kingdom was gripped